Good evening, Jeopardy fans, and we are live once again here on hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel, presented by thejeopardyfan.com. As always, I am Andy Saunders, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. Let's get right into introducing tonight's panel. First up, making a return to hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel, welcome back to Harvey Silikovitz. Thanks for coming on, and let the folks know what you've been up to lately.
Hey, Andy, it's great to be back. And as you and some of your viewers know, my big thing is my world karaoke tour, and I'm up to singing in 51 countries, and now, after Oklahoma this past weekend, 39 U.S. states.
So I hear, are you kind of in a race to 50, or are you...
I would prefer not to comment on that subject. But there is someone else who claims to have 49, and it could end up being disputed.
Okay. Well, in that case, there could be... So I won't ask you any further on that then. Thanks for coming on to hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel tonight. And also, we've got one of the challengers from last Friday night's game. Welcome to hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel, Rebekah Smith.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so before we get into discussion of last week's episodes, there was something that came up on tonight's game. It's not really a spoiler for tonight's game, so I think I'm safe to bring it up. But off the top of tonight's game, Alex made a comment, and a bunch of you actually texted to me, tweeted at me, Facebooked me, yada, 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 asking me to clarify. So I'll do so here. What Alex said is basically that in order to compete in the next Tournament of Champions, which starts November 6th, Austin Rogers needs to have lost. As of Friday, he's at 9 wins. There are 20 shows left until the Tournament of Champions. So you might think that that's a long way away, and certainly he'd need to... obviously, winning 20 more games is quite something. I believe my prediction model put the chances of that at somewhere around 40-1 right now, of him actually making it to November 3rd. But basically what Alex said is that if Austin wins until is still champion on November 3rd, he will be held over to the following Tournament of Champions. Whereas if he loses before November 3rd, he'll be in the one starting November 6th. Or November, yeah. Actually, sorry. November, yeah, it starts November 6th. 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah. Yep, I have my November dates right. Yes, okay. So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, as always, if you've got questions or comments, I have a YouTube chat. There's also a hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel on Twitter, so you can leave questions or comments there. If I like them, I'll read them out. So, my first question specifically is for you, Rebekah, tonight. How hard was it waiting since the end of April until October 6th to actually, be able to tell everyone and share how you did on Jeopardy?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. It was a long wait for sure. I don't know how long the average wait is, but I got the impression it was a little longer than usual because of the season break. Luckily, my parents were able to come to the taping with me, so they knew everything that had happened. So yeah, that was good. I could talk it over with them, and most of my friends. I have a few friends who are really big Jeopardy casual fans or don't watch Jeopardy. So luckily, after about a month, they all forgot, and they didn't really start to remember until September that it was actually coming out. So not as difficult as it could have been, maybe.
Oh yeah, that seems to be a common thing, at least the past few weeks with people. Their friends forget. Oh yeah, my friend's going to be on Jeopardy in a few months, and then once it gets closer, you remind them, and it's it's kind of fun to be able to kind of have that double joy almost. So
yeah, it was nice. Yeah, relive it.
Did you have a watch party?
I did. Yeah, we went to one of the bars down the street from me, which is great. They have big rooms for rent, so I just pulled together about 10 or 15 people, and got them to set the TVs up for us. And yeah, it was fun. I definitely really was glad that we were able to do that, so I didn't just have to sort of watch it by myself again.
Yeah, I and for people who are watching this who haven't been on, I would also recommend setting up a watch party, regardless of how well you do. You know, try to share the moment with your friends for sure. So that's that's something that people should absolutely do. Now, I'm just gonna open this one up to everyone. Definitely the most controversial aspect of last week's game, something that was eventually known as Sherbetgate, or depending on how you want to pronounce it, Sherbertgate. So I'm kind of curious, how did that play out in the studio, Rebekah? Obviously, you were there because you were waiting to tape. Do you remember how that played out actually in the studio?
Yeah, I don't remember as well as you might think, considering that I was there. A lot of that day, I have to confess, has become something of a blur. But I do definitely remember that it caused a no small amount of controversy. There was a little bit of a pause. There were some quick discussions, heads put together. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you more details, but really, a lot of that day was a blur. I didn't remember a good chunk of my episode until I was watching it again on October 6th.
Okay, yeah. So it was a blur, but it's good to know that they actually did put the judges' heads together a little bit. But what do you how would you pronounce that word, Rebekah?
Me, I would say sherbet, but okay. That's just me. Yeah, but I'm also half English, so I'm not always an authority for pronunciation.
And Harvey, I know I think you have an opinion on. Well, first of all, how would you pronounce the word?
Well, although I've lived in New York for over 20 years, I've always pronounced it sherbet, no R at the end. But I did grow up in New Jersey, and it was my parents who taught me over there how to pronounce the word. So maybe a lot of New Yorkers do pronounce it sherbet, and I just never noticed.
So obviously there was a lot of controversy. Merriam-Webster, one of its lexicographers, weighed in. In fact, they put Jeopardy on blast and said, literally, you have the 11th edition of the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary on the judges' table, and the Merriam-Webster lexicographer was aghast that sherbet was not accepted. My own personal thought on it, it's tough because obviously, I mean, I probably would have accepted it had I been judging, based on the fact that I believe it is possible to spell a word SHERBET and pronounce an invisible second R. But this isn't the first time that the show has insisted upon general American English. And if you remember a couple of years ago now, back in December of 2015, Rob Russell from Tennessee was nagged on a Daily Double for pronouncing it foliage, which is an Appalachian regionalism for sure, and certainly a non-standard pronunciation, but probably should have been acceptable.
And in fact, just the other day, I was in an Uber, and my Uber driver made a comment about the fall foliage. That's how she pronounced it. And I was thinking to myself, they would not have accepted that if you were in Culver City. But I did have a response to what the lexicographer of Merriam-Webster said, because I followed that Twitter exchange. And if you look at the dictionary that he cited, it ties the alternate pronunciation sherbet to a spelling that ends ERT. And the clue that was at issue in that game, both words, sorbet and sherbet or sherbet, had to end in BET. So And I think that's what Jeopardy explained when they made their public statement on their, was it on their website, about the clue. And so I think technically they had to nag him, but that it was an unfair clue.
You know, that's something that you know I could definitely see. Now I see that there are some of us who are listening to the YouTube live stream right now. If you have an opinion on Sherbet Gate, I'd love to hear it. And there's also hashtag Jeopardy live panel. So please weigh in on that. Now I'll go back to that in a second while you're frantically typing away at your keyboards. I'm going to ask another question of you, Rebekah.
Sure.
Obviously, you walk into the green room on I guess it probably would have been a Wednesday or so for your taping, and you are introduced to Austin. He's introduced as a 4-day champion, having won $123,000. Do you remember what your reaction was?
Yeah, so I actually met Austin on the shuttle bus. So they shuttle you over from the hotel to the studio. So most of us met on the shuttle bus. So I definitely remember being like, oh, okay, that guy. And yeah, it was very, very early in the morning, and I was still trying to figure out exactly what was going on. So in context, it didn't seem any more alarming than most of what was happening at the moment. Yeah, I mean, certainly, it always it's a little intimidating to hear that you're sort of there's someone who you're up against who's on a hot streak. But again, no more intimidating than the entire process of suddenly finding out you're going to be on Jeopardy in 5 weeks when you auditioned 2 years ago. So.
That, again, makes a lot of sense. So I'm guessing, okay, so you would have auditioned, would have been 20...
It was in June of 2015. Yeah, it was in June of 2015 in Atlanta.
And so they gave you a call, and you were like, why are you calling me now? It's been much more than 18 months. And...
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was March of this year, and I got a call from, I think it was Ryan, and he said, oh, we're just updating your information. And I was like, well, that checks out, because it's been over 18 months. I was actually thinking about maybe taking the test again to go back through the process. And he sort of updated all my information and then was basically like, just kidding. How would you feel about being on Jeopardy in 5 weeks? And I was like, oh, sure. So and then things moved very fast from there.
So, okay. Yep. That certainly checks out for sure. I personally haven't experienced that part of the process. I've only made it as far as the audition, but sure, yeah. Certainly that certainly checks out with a lot of the other people who've received the calls. The contestant coordinators are all coy and being like, yeah, we're just updating your information. We're just going to check this out. And then it's like, surprise, you just got the call.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So did you kind of, were you kind of any more or less intimidated when you obviously you saw him put up 4 pretty impressive games on the stage before you got up to play against him? So
yeah, I mean, it kind of went both ways. On the one hand, yeah, it was a little more intimidating sort of actually watching him in action. And the game right before mine, I don't actually remember a ton of the details from, again, a little bit of shell shock, but I remember it was very lively, a lot of back and forth, a lot of I think some higher scores. Don't quote me on that, though. I know there's people who keep track of those things. So it just was sort of a very lively game. You had to really sort of sit up and pay attention. But on the other hand, it almost felt like a little bit of a warm-up, actually being able to be, unlike maybe the people who were first up sort of right out of the gate, being able to sit there, sort of get a little bit of a feel for the rhythm of the games. So on the one hand, yeah, watching Austin in action was made me a little more intimidated. But on the other hand, being able to watch the general process 4 times over made me a little bit less intimidated. So on balance, really worked out.
Mm-hmm. So you're happy with kind of how things went for you in general, just because you got the chance to actually see a bunch of games taped.
Yeah, and honestly, it was a great experience. Like, I live on the East Coast, so it was a pretty not like difficult, right? But it took a lot for me to sort of get out there, and it was nice sort of not to just sort of be on maybe the first episode and like tape it and then sort of go home. It was nice to sort of get a full day out of it. I got to eat lunch in the Sony cafeteria with everybody who was left. So that was kind of fun. So yeah, I mean, I never really expected to actually get onto Jeopardy, at least this time around. Like I said, it had been a very long time since I auditioned. So honestly, anything that happened after that phone call was kind of a bonus.
Nice. So you did bring up lunch. So I'm going to kind of swing over to that point right now. So I'm going to ask you, what did you have for lunch in the Sony commissary on their dime?
I had a salad. They have a really boss salad bar. And I think maybe soup. It's hard to remember, but a big salad.
Well, very nice, very nice. I'm sure that there will be some people listening who will shake their fist at the screen when they find out, because there is a very vocal minority who is an anti-salad contingent, but I would say that there's certainly there are other people who swear by salad, at least from the perspective of it's not going to weigh you down in the afternoon, and it's food.
Yeah,
so.
I was a little worried about that. I mean, definitely feeling a little bit of nerves, right? A little bit of butterflies in the stomach. So I wasn't sure I wanted to go for like the full hamburger effect.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, absolutely. So did you have any kind of Slumdog Millionaire moments when you were on stage where you kind of have some weird, some great backstory behind knowing the answer to a certain question you saw?
Nothing too crazy, but in terms of like a backstory, but the last question that I got, so the next to last question on the Double Jeopardy board was about buckyballs.
Yes.
And I actually had a high school chemistry teacher who was very enthusiastic about chemistry, and I was not super enthusiastic about chemistry in school. I liked it okay, but it wasn't my thing. And so actually sort of when I saw that question coming down the pipeline, you can tell a little bit, not entirely, but sort of, especially when you're in the middle and you can get a read on both people, which I was, you can sort of tell when people are getting ready to buzz in a little bit, you sort of tense up. You can tell if they're getting ready to really go for it or if they're sort of stepping back to think about it. And I could kind of sense that maybe they didn't know what was coming down, and it was pretty instantaneous for me as soon as I saw the buckyball, which I don't know, for some reason I had read about in like a children's magazine when I was younger. It really stuck with me because buckyball is a fun thing to say. So I could kind of tell that the people on either side of me, that Diana and Austin, were not super into it. And it was sort of like it was just my question sent down for me. I was really trying to get it up, get my score up to where I wouldn't be sort of locked into third place, depending on the other two people's bets for Final Jeopardy. And it was kind of handed to me so that I could achieve that score or close to it, because I'm not very good at keeping up with simultaneous scoring, but I was aware that I needed it. And I suddenly sort of the heavens opened and the answer came to me. And my chemistry teacher in the week before my episode taped posted on Facebook, and he said, "Gee, I sure hope there's some good chemistry questions on that show." And I was like, oh, well, you're in luck, because that's the one that sort of handed me, although I did end up in third place, handed me the chance to maybe get out of it. So
yeah, for sure.
That was my moment. That was the one I felt really good about.
Very nice, very nice. So, the comments are coming in regarding sherbet, yada yada yada. We have Anupama Srirangan. She was on panel last week. She definitely team sherbet, not sherbet, and she also is kind of rankling a bit at foliage. The New Yorkers are also chiming in. Alex Epstein with "I'm from New York too, so I'm team sherbet." Trevor Mahoney is team, and then he's put SHERBE parentheses RT.
It's a good middle ground.
Whatever that means.
I'm still trying to figure out what that means. Which is kind of why I spelled it out, because I couldn't figure out how he wanted it pronounced. So one thing that I've started to ask about here on #Jeopardy Live panel this season is something I like to call "See You Again," and it's basically where I kind of take a look at something, or I should say, ask about something that's come up in the past week, and ask ask the panel whether or not you'd like to see it again. And for this one, fan of the show David Kendall really wanted me to ask about a category from Tuesday's game called Psychic Jeopardy. That was the one where there was something. I guess you could the best way of describing it. There was a general clue, and then in parentheses and in hushed psychic tones, there was the part that gave it away. And to that, I ask the panel and the people listening, do you want to see that category? Or do you think that or would you like to see that category again? That Psychic Jeopardy category. What do you think, Harvey?
I was not a fan of that category. When I actually watched the episode, I didn't understand at all what was going on with the category and like, why are they calling it Psychic Jeopardy? And it wasn't until I read an explanation on the Jeopardy message board from some fans of the show that I understood what they were trying to do. And I think it's an example of the writers just getting a little too cute, trying to update. It's basically a potpourri or hodgepodge type category where they have like 5 different subject matters represented in the clues. And I just think it came off as a little too clumsy and awkward.
Did you have trouble understanding the category when you were watching it in the audience, Rebekah?
I think so. I'm sorry. I should have really boned up on this, but I don't have a TV, so it made it a little tricky. I will say that there were several categories, and I do think that was one of them throughout the course of the week taping, so over the day that I was there, where it seemed like the kind of thing where if there was maybe like an explanation or a briefer, it would have been a really fun category, but because there's not, that's not how Jeopardy is set up to go. You don't get a little summary of how it's supposed to work or a practice clue. It seemed like it would take till maybe the middle of the category, the second or third clue, for people to hit their stride, just to figure out what it was. And I will say that for me personally, and I talked to a couple of other people after their games or in between games who had the same experience, the category is the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things to keep in mind when you're trying to remember about watching for lights and listening to clues, reading the clue, figuring out what the people around you are doing. And there were a couple of times, even with pretty straightforward categories in my game, where I would sort of go blank and remember the category name. It would have been a really easy answer. So I think that is probably, again, though I haven't seen that one again since the taping, a general thing that I would hope the writers would keep in mind, that it might be sort of fun for the people watching at home who can Google it and figure out what's supposed to be going on, but it's a little tricky. It doesn't always make for the best gameplay when you're trying to keep a lot of other things in mind too.
That makes a lot of sense. And just to quickly step back into the sherbet, basically Trevor has clarified. He has said he spells it S-H-E-R-B-E-T, but pronounces it sherbet.
Contrary to what the Merriam-Webster dictionary says.
Well,
I was also wondering, like, the writers are all based in LA, and what extent do or can they take into account regional variations of pronunciation when they're writing that type of clue? I don't know what their backgrounds are, and maybe some of them are from other parts of the country, but I think that maybe I have a little concern that there could be an LA bubble effect that affects clues of that nature.
Well, the nice thing is, at least by my experience, Merriam-Webster's lexicographers are pretty much as descriptive as they come when it comes to the prescriptivism versus descriptivism debate. And so I would say that if something is listed in, the Merriam-Webster dictionary or the Oxford dictionary for that matter, that's because both of those dictionaries are pretty darn descriptive these days, that it's clearly in enough usage that it should be taken into account. Now, as a counterpoint, based on, I'm going off on a bit of an aside here, the Philadelphia regionalism, the all-encompassing term Jawn, Jawn, obviously, because its definition is pretty much any person, place, or thing. So clearly, you can't answer every clue on Jeopardy with what is a Jawn. But to that degree, I mean, Merriam-Webster is looking at that sort of a word for inclusion in the dictionary because of its regionalism. And I would say if it reaches a point where a word makes it into a dictionary as an alternative pronunciation or an alternative spelling, I think that Jeopardy needs to be cognizant of that and at least be generally aware that in a region of the country where a contestant might hail from, that that's going to be something that they might see or they might hear as a response. And I know in my own personal preparation, I know that I will probably at some point need to make sure I know the American term for a lot of Canadianisms. One example, the war you guys call the French and Indian War, up in Canada we call the 7 Years' War.
Right.
Okay, so moving on to another question here. Did Alex talk about what you thought he'd talk about for your contestant interview?
Yeah, which was a big relief because I'd forgotten what the other things I put on the sheet were. Because I know he doesn't always. They do prep you on that, or they did prep us on that. They said, here's the sort of the sheet of things you said, and here's the one that he's going to talk about unless he doesn't. So good luck, and sort of funneled us out. But luckily he did because that was the one I really wanted to talk about.
Awesome. That's very nice, and it's good. I would say that Alex should stick to the card more because it keeps the contestant in a better mindset, I would say. Would you agree with that? You were prepared to talk about something, you felt confident about it, and you're able to and you weren't panicking because he went off and talked about something different, and then that talking about something different throws you off your game for the next 15 clues.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have been strong enough to throw me off my game where anything else wasn't. There's like I said, there's a lot going on in that 20 to 25 minute taping. But I mean, certainly, yeah. And you can, I think, see it sometimes when people do get thrown off, even if it doesn't go on to affect their game. It does lead to a few seconds maybe of awkward silence, or you're sort of shifting gears, trying to figure out what to say. There's sort of cameras pointed at your face. Everyone's waiting for you. So yeah, I mean. Yeah, it might be nice, but at the same time, he's been doing this a long time. I think he's got to find amusement somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. So, while we're on the subject of talking with Alex, do you remember what you guys talked about when you're all standing on stage at the end?
You mean at the end? Yeah, a little bit. I mean, mostly. I think mostly it was kind of we were all sort of talking to Austin. Of course, at that time, it was. A really solid way to clinch his run, and it was a little bit of a different atmosphere. It felt maybe a little bit different because it was the very last show of the very last day of that whole block of taping, and then they were off for the summer. So they're sort of like turning the studio off around us, which is a little bit funny. I mean, not exactly, but So you just a little bit of sort of. And we were talking about the board as well. I would say that's the other thing. I think it's fair to say, although Diana and Austin aren't here, that it was. We all had the experience. It was a fairly tough board. I know there were a lot of triple stumpers, the ones that nobody rang in for. And we were sort of talking about maybe what had made it that way a little bit, or like sort of saying, did you feel that? Yeah, I felt that way. And generally just sort of congratulating Austin. It was a really solid win, and had looked like it was maybe in doubt or danger for a little while. So it was interesting seeing that turn around. And generally, I think just trying to figure out what we were doing next, or I was anyway. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of a roller coaster ride, I guess. So
yeah, and I mean the numbers played that out for sure. There were, I think, by my count, 11 different clues where you guys didn't even decided that you didn't want to ring in on them. So
Yeah, and yeah, I think I know there were like more than 8 or 9. There was certainly a large number, and they're a little bit contagious, I think, because after you get 1 or 2 where you're completely at sea, it makes you a little more, or made me anyway. I don't want to speak for the other two. A little more sort of hesitant, or a little more confused. Or when I would see like maybe Diana, who's was very poisoned, really fast to ring in, or it was a lot of things when neither one of them wanted to go for it. Even if I thought I might know it, it's a little bit throws you off a little bit. You're sort of going, well, they don't. They don't even think they know it. I'm not sure that I know it. So
now, how much specifically of one of those 11, how much did that, all of you being at sea on that $400 clue on women authors affect your daily double wager when you got it on the next clue at 800? Just checking in. Rebekah, did you hear my question?
I did, yes. I think my internet's a little wonky.
Certainly, I'll repeat the question for you. The $400 triple stumper in 19th century women authors. Obviously, you picked the daily double immediately thereafter at 800, and then kind of you just bet $1,000 of your 2,000. Were you kind of spooked by the fact that nobody had rung in on the $400 clue when making that bet?
Not except so much as it fed into my sort of overall impression that we were running into some really.
So it looks like your internet has cut out again. I'm sorry. The last thing I heard was getting into. It sounded like you were saying it looked like you were getting into a difficult board or a difficult category.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I live in a group house, so our internet's a little bit sketchy.
That's okay.
Not so much a difficult category, but that it was maybe going to be another difficult board. And at that point, I was really concerned. I wanted to make sure I didn't go back into the hole or have get really low on funds. I wanted to sort of try and make sure that I was coming out into Final Jeopardy, and I wasn't sure sort of what was coming down the pipeline because it had been a few really tough questions and categories before that.
And obviously, that certainly makes a lot of sense for sure. And I know pretty much every single Jeopardy contestant goes in with the goal of at least I want to make it to Final Jeopardy my first game.
Yeah. That was definitely my goal. Make it to Final Jeopardy, not say something totally stupid. And I think I achieved both of those things.
So my next question here, kind of a little bit more for Harvey, but certainly if you have anything to chime in with here, Rebekah, you're welcome to it. How do you think that, Austin's style of play will translate to the Tournament of Champions, assuming obviously he doesn't win 20 games in a row and ends up in November's tournament? How do you think his style of play will translate to the Tournament of Champions?
I mean, it's hard to say. You and I have talked about the fact that what we call his Coriat score, which is basically just a reflection of the correct clues that he's answered without penalizing him for incorrect daily doubles, is pretty good, but as super champions go, it's not stratospheric. And a big part of his game and a reason he's been outperforming his Coriats is because he's so good at exploiting the daily doubles, at landing on them and then wagering big on them and getting them right. And that helps him bury his opponents to the point where so many of his games have been runaways. But in the Tournament of Champions, he's going to be going up against people who are going to be more likely to try to take the daily doubles away from him, especially in the Double Jeopardy round where he's been so deadly with them. And I think people like Seth or Andrew, for example, not to slight any of the others, Jason also, before Austin came along, I thought was a really excellent player and one of my favorites in the field. And people like that are good enough that if they can keep him from exploiting the daily doubles, I think they can beat him. And I would definitely rank him as one of the top people in the field, but I don't think he's unbeatable by any means.
How much do you think it will affect things? Because obviously this tournament taped before Austin's run started. How much do you think will it to be to Austin's advantage that at least for the quarterfinal and possibly even the semifinal, his opponents won't have actually seen him play?
Oh, that's actually a good point. But I think at least some of them are going to be playing strategically and hunting for the daily doubles themselves, even not knowing that that's one of his superpowers. But you're right that the unfamiliarity might give him a little bit of an advantage there. But I still think that I would probably make him the favorite at this point, but not to a prohibitive extent. Like, I do think it's easy to forget some of the other players in the field because they played so long ago. It's been so long since the last one. And people like Andrew Powell and Buzzy Cohen have had a long time to study and get even better and fortify their knowledge bases. And that's one advantage that some of those players are going to have over him. Because assuming he loses before then, he will not have had very much time between the end of his run and the taping. So what you'll be seeing of him in Tournament of Champions will be pretty much the same Austin that we're seeing during his run.
Okay. So, Rebekah, what else did you do when you were in Culver City for the taping?
Yeah, so basically the whole day of taping, I was at the studio. My parents and I did go out for dinner that night, but we didn't leave till the very end of the day. But I was out for about 3 days in LA, so we spent a day in Santa Monica, just up the coast from Culver City, and we went canyon hiking. We went down to the boardwalks, really nice. And we spent a little bit of time at some of the LA beaches out at Hollywood Beach. I got to see the Pacific Ocean, which I'd only seen once before in my life. That was fun. Significantly warmer here because we saw it in San Francisco last time, much colder there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't out because I did have to, with the way flights work out, and I had to get back for work later in the week. My parents had a blast. They were out for like a whole week on vacation without me. They went out to Napa and all kinds of fun things, but mostly I went to the beach.
Very nice, very nice. So, I know that you mentioned that you obviously, you don't have a TV and haven't been able to watch a lot of Jeopardy. So, I'm going to ask this question with the using the premise that assume you'll get a TV at some point in the future, and we'll be able to start watching Jeopardy again. How will, having been a contestant and having taped an episode of the show, being at the studio, how will that affect how you watch Jeopardy in the future?
That's a good question. I think I definitely will still have a lot of fun watching it. I'm really hoping to see a couple of my friends on it, the ones who encouraged me to go on. I'm encouraging them to sign up. So maybe one day I'll be able to watch them in return. But I think probably, I would say I ever got impatient with contestants before, right? But I might sometimes be like, come on, like, how could you miss that? Or how could you not know that? Or how could you fall so far behind? All in good fun, but a little bit of sort of wondering. And now I know they could have managed to flub up something simple or forgotten to answer in a form of a question or completely failed to ring in because I've been there and I've done most of those things. So.
That makes a lot of sense. And Harvey, from your perspective, you've been kind of a diehard in the kind of in the super fan community for a while. How has your viewing experience changed between now and when you kind of discovered the online Jeopardy community many years ago? Well,
I think it's been very helpful to read the accounts from contestants on the Jeopardy board and to hear them speak in forums like this. Because I think when I first started becoming a regular viewer, I was very judgy. And I think I have a lot more compassion now and more of an empathy for what contestants go through and how no matter how well prepared you are, how you can run into bad luck so quickly and how easily things can go awry and, one of those there, but for the grace of God type things. And I know that if the time comes when I get the call, I could easily flame out. So I think it's made me definitely a lot more sympathetic to the plight of of contestants who haven't been as successful as Austin.
Okay. So one comment from Anupama again. After watching Austin's Good Morning America interview, she thinks Austin is going to, quote unquote, prepare for the TOC by learning more about strategies and less new trivia. So she thinks that Austin will attempt to become better at gameplay, and that's how he'll prepare for the TOC. An interesting thought for sure, and I could definitely see him doing that. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And it also may depend on whether or not he is still champion on November 3rd.
And I just wanted to add a little further to my point about what I think his chances are in the TOC. In the quarterfinals, the matchups are not random, and they're probably not going to put Seth or Buzzy, the two top winners before his run during this period, against him in those games. So at least those players will have had the opportunity to have seen his style of play if they're still around in the semifinals. And even if someone like Andrew Powell or Jason Sterlacci has to go against him in the quarterfinals, it's possible that such a player could also advance as a wild card and will then have acquired the knowledge, or at least one game's worth of knowledge of how he plays. So for some of the top players in the field, he won't be a complete mystery to them by the time they face him.
That is, yeah, that's an excellent point for sure. So, another question I've got here. I think you've answered this one before, Harvey, at one point. But this one's certainly for you, Rebekah. Then, I found that the vast majority of Jeopardy players kind of have that quote unquote origin story of how they became a Jeopardy fan in the first place. So for you, I ask, how did you become a Jeopardy fan?
I grew up watching Jeopardy with my parents. So we didn't have cable for a very long time. So we just watched the major networks, and always came on around 7 or 7:30, which is prime TV watching time. So that's how I became a Jeopardy fan. I actually didn't audition for the test, though, for years. I went to college with a good friend named Eric, who was always auditioning for the college one, and then when he graduated, for the regular test. So that's how I became the kind of Jeopardy fan who had to keep my friend company, or rather I took the test to keep my friend company. And then I thought a trip to Atlanta sounded fun, and then somehow I wound up in Culver City.
So Atlanta was your first audition then?
Auditioned before. So if I sound shell-shocked by it all, it's been a wild ride.
Fair enough, for sure. So I'm at the point actually right now where I ask you guys, do you have any questions for each other or for me, or anything you thought I might bring up tonight but didn't?
No.
Those
Only because you've been so comprehensive. Yeah.
Sorry, Harvey, I missed what you were saying.
Those are always the toughest questions, the open-ended ones.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny. In my side gig as a freelance transcriptionist, I was doing a boatload of transcripts for a friend's PhD thesis interviews, and I got the idea to ask this one because at the end of all of her interviews, she was like, "So, is there anything you thought that I would bring up today and didn't?" And I kept on hearing her ask this question. I'm thinking that's a perfect question to end live panel with every episode. So,
Yeah, it's a good one.
yeah, because it certainly, in case I happen to, completely forget something that was apparently really obvious to everyone else, and I just happened to gloss over it for some reason. I mean, I take notes, but I'm human. I forget things sometimes. So, okay, so I'd like to thank you guys for joining me on hashtag Jeopardy live panel this evening. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to everyone who tuned in live as well, and also who will tune in a little bit later on, both on YouTube and on the audio simulcast on iTunes. As always, our Patreon is patreon.com/thejeopardyfan. And also, you can find statistics now for everyone who has won at least 10 games. I have put up game-by-game statistics for all of those players on the jeopardyfan.com. I'm probably going to come under some heat for the term I have used. I have coined the term ultra champ to refer to players who have won more than 10 games. I know I asked about this at the end of Seth Wilson's run, and I got some blowback for it, and I thought about it longer, and I still like the term, so I ran with it. So from that perspective, ultra champ it is. If you don't like it, well, I'm sorry, but that's what I've gone with here. So for everyone here at hashtag Jeopardy live panel and the jeopardyfan.com, thank you very much for tuning in and taking part. Thanks to you guys as well. I hope you guys had fun. If you want to say,
thank you very much.
If there's anything you guys else want to say to the listeners before we finish up for the evening, now would be the time to do so.
Just thank you very much for tuning in and listening to us regale you with our stories. And thanks for inviting me on.
I don't know
No problem.
If I use the word regale in my case, but Andy, I do want to thank you for having me on once again. It's always a great deal of fun. And Rebekah, it was nice meeting you.
Same to you.
Okay, so thank you very much for tuning in and taking part on to the hashtag Jeopardy live panel this evening. We will see you next Monday night at 9:05 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night.